Thanks, Joe. It's great to be here with everybody today. I was talking with Joe before the presentation got started, and as much as I'm a science geek, I hope to offer you something a little bit different today. Um, there are wonderful resources available. Um, on if you want to learn more about best management practices themselves, natural shoreline restoration. Um, there's outstanding resources available through Midwest Glacial Lakes Partnership, the Michigan and Inland Lakes Partnership, the Michigan Lakes and Streams Association, as well as a number of resources in our surrounding Great Lakes states. So I refer you to those resources. Today, what I want to talk to you about is this idea of that we're all riparians, right? Joe referenced my kidding about being an uplander and how important my trees are to the watershed in which I live. And the fact of the matter is that we're all riparians. Some people live a little further from the shore than others. We all contribute to groundwater. Anything that we do on or in the land on which we live impacts all water eventually. The watershed in which I'm privileged to be the guardian of, I've got a picture on the screen of the iconic Inspiration Point, the fabled National Geographic most beautiful place in America shot across Big Glen Lake, across the narrow still Little Glen, the dune climate Sleeping Bear, and Manitou Islands across the low spot in the background of the picture there. So iconic blue Caribbean-like water. But this watershed in particular, even though it's only about 46 square mile watershed, with 40% of it covered by national lakeshore land and protected in perpetuity, this watershed derives more than 50% of its water from groundwater. The surface water is fed by springs. So it's an invisible thing. It's important to protect. Today, I feel also very fortunate to be presenting to you on World Water Day and to be a part of making the invisible visible. Few people that you talk to remember their basic sixth grade education about how watersheds work and how groundwater is connected. So any way that we can make that relationship more visible will help encourage people to practice best management practices. My motto is that nobody intentionally wants to do harm. They just don't always realize what they're doing or the alternatives to what they're doing that could have a more friendly impact on water. So in Glen Lake, back in I think 2015, a program was started called the Glen Lake Guardian program, with this motto, protecting the watershed drop by drop, meaning that if we all do our part, all those little parts can add up to making a really big difference. We worked in partnership with Lake Charlevoix Lake Association. We developed a pledge system that listed best management practices that people could voluntarily commit to taking. these early iterations of the Guardian program and things that were going on Lake Charlevoix in Michigan's Northwest Lower Peninsula were the predecessor to what is now the Michigan Natural Shoreline Partnership shoreline surveys that are available throughout the state of Michigan for any riparian to take an online inventory of their practices, get a score, and get a customized recommendation for how they can improve their stewardship of the water body that they own property on or live on. And, you know, why all the attention to shores? The National Lakes inventory that was conducted in 2012 identified that loss of natural shoreline habitat was the greatest threat to our inland lakes. They are critical habitat for at least part of the life cycle of so many critters, like the one I've got on the screen. And they fulfill a vital role in reducing runoff, picking up contaminants with their long natural roots, reducing the impact of wave and ice erosion along the shoreline, and, you know, keeping excessive sediment and nutrients out of the surface water. So here is a picture of the Glen Lake-Crystal River Watershed, a couple of pictures. The one on the left is a simple drawing of our surface watershed. The drawing on, or the map rather, on the right includes our ground watershed as well as our surface watershed, and identifies critical areas of priority for protection, either due to their adjacency to wetlands, other inland water bodies, vital groundwater recharge areas, and to be able to show people in a visual sense what we mean when we talk about what happens in the watershed affects the water. Maps can be a really powerful way to tell the story. The Glen Lake Association is currently updating our website to incorporate an interactive map where people can type in their address and see where they are in the watershed, along with other key points of interest like public accesses, restrooms, those kinds of things. So visuals are a really important way of telling the story and making it compelling. Another thing that we do in the Glen Lake-Crystal River Watershed, which I've seen a lot of folks do, we have these watershed signs that we post as people enter our watershed along our county roads and in the national park, just to elevate awareness about watersheds. Maybe you recall that 6th grade education, or get someone to ask questions about it. These are some of the materials that we use to promote the Guardian program. You'll see in the picture on the screen, this bumper sticker. We encourage people to put those on their cars, on their mailboxes, wherever they think that they might be seen, just as a way of generating awareness, maybe starting a conversation. Again, building awareness about watersheds and the need to protect them. And also in the picture, there is a wonderful resource that I've used to promote the beauty of natural shorelines and to maybe break through some of the preconceived notions that some folks have when you say natural shoreline. They think that it's just going to be wild and untamed. And this publication that's put out by a number of organizations that I already mentioned, including Glacial Lakes, Midwest Glacial Lakes Partnership, is a wonderful way to introduce riparian property owners to how beautiful and intentional a natural shoreline can be, and lots of different ways to incorporate that into someone's landscape plan. And so we distribute these to every riparian in our watershed. And Joe mentioned that I'm also the chair of Leelanau Clean Water, the watershed collaborative body for Leelanau County. We have 6 residential inland lakes in addition to the lakes in the Glen Lake watershed. And we have made it a priority to get these in the hands of the riparians around the other lakes as well. One of the really exciting and innovative ways that we make the invisible visible is through our summer discovery boat program. It's basically an inland lake school ship educational program. We run discovery boat cruises every Friday in July. We do a 2-hour morning cruise and a 2-hour afternoon cruise. We get people out on the water. We get their hands wet. We get them understand, maybe having a better appreciation for the aquatic gardens in our watershed. We do not call these weeds, they are aquatic vegetation. They serve a vital role in a healthy ecosystem. And by examining these things in a hands-on way, identifying macroinvertebrates and other little critters that are dependent on these vegetation gardens for their life. People leave our discovery boat cruises changed. I think probably the most common comment that people make is, I knew that I loved this watershed, this place, but I never understood quite why. And now I feel like I have a deeper, better appreciation and understanding. And I want to know what more I can do to help. And that's exactly what we want people to come away with, is a feeling of inspiration, and that there are things that they can do that are accessible to make a difference, not just in our watershed, but these things, whenever we do something good for the water anywhere, it's good for the water everywhere. And often these people, the folks in this picture here were visitors to our watershed. And so they're going to take these ideas back to wherever they live and spread the good word. The discovery boat cruises are something that other lakes in adjacent watersheds have begun to take on and are introducing as part of their summer outreach curriculum, if you call it, as well. And these are also a great opportunity for looking back at the shore, at our forested slopes and ridge lines, and talk about why those components of the watershed are so important as well. It can be hard when you're in your woods or on your shore to recognize the connection in the way that you can when you're out in the middle of the lake. So another motto that I have is to meet people where they're at. all people, whether they live, work, or play in our watershed, even for a day. We want them to know everything that they can and be doing everything that they can to protect water. So on Tuesdays during the summer, spring, summer, and fall in Glen Arbor, Michigan, I set up an information booth during our farmers market. Our farmers markets are almost as popular as our watershed is. And this is a great place to meet people, answer quick questions, and just make water protection more visible. I utilize a number of volunteers as well for this. Joe, do you have any questions?
Yeah, we had a question from the audience. This is related to high water levels in Michigan. So we've had high water levels over the past few years, but other states across the Midwest Glacial Lakes Partnership have had low water levels. So I suppose this question really applies equally well in both cases. How's the Glen Lake Guardian program promoted natural shorelines to build in resilience for changes in water levels? Have you guys talked about that or had success with that message?
Right. And as we all know, at least in the Midwest and particularly in Northwest Lower Michigan, our frequency of high intensity, short duration precipitation, summer precipitation events, with these long periods of almost drought, behave really differently on the landscape than the climate regime that we maybe were used to 30 years ago. And so it makes the vital role of natural vegetation on our slopes. Trees are an enormous repository of water. They store hundreds of gallons of water to help with offset the impacts of drought, especially in spring-fed watershed, like the one that I am the guardian for, but also, the impact that they have related to erosion. So if you follow that line of thinking right on down to the shore, what is going to make a shore more resilient, whether the water levels are high or low, is going to be native plants with their deeper roots, more complex root structures, are going to be more drought resistant, and also able to handle the fluctuations in water level while also holding the soil in place. Does that kind of answer the question? I've got an example of some bioengineering that we did as a Guardian program as well to make the bioengineering solutions for that more visible to folks as well. So maybe I'll follow up on that a little more later.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Thanks. Okay. If I may, there's one more question that maybe sure. I can ask now. Has Glen Lake ever had any issues in the past with harmful algal blooms? And if so, how are these dealt with, and how did you work with the public on those changes to address them?
We have not encountered algal blooms are a natural occurrence in watersheds. We do have algal blooms, and part of what I don't have slides of that here, I do have a slide of some microcystin. We do have the types of algae in our watershed that could produce microcystin, but we do not, it's not really understood what triggering mechanism causes those to become the toxic manifestation versus the benign form of that type of algal bloom. But we do know that increased warmer temperatures earlier in the spring, longer into the fall. We've had some record high water temperatures that we've never encountered before in our watershed. It just all of that traces back to we cannot control what's already happening with our changing weather patterns, but everything that we can do along our shores, our slopes, to encourage native plants that are going to be able to take up excess nutrients, hold soil in place, encourage people, if they are irrigating, to use water from the lake, which is already naturally fertilized, and to heighten awareness about if you use native plants, if you have a natural lawn even that is composed of native grasses, you don't need to fertilize. You don't need to mow, you don't need to water, because they are uniquely adapted to live in this environment and are more resilient to changes in climate. So it all goes back to nutrients and the increased capacity of our natively adapted plants for minimizing the impact of excess nutrients and impacts from climate change that could cause big pulses of nutrients to enter the watershed and possibly trigger an algal bloom. So I'm going to move on. Again, like I said, it's important though. These are the kinds of questions that I get at my booth in downtown Glen Arbor, along with a number of regular volunteers that are also ambassadors for our Guardian program that help me. And then this is just a fun shot. We have a trick-or-treating event that takes place in our local community. And this is often a great place to interact with the local folks, right? The people that are here year-round, the families that have kids going to school in our school district. And it's really fun to engage the kids and ask them to talk to their parents about what a watershed is. And what they think they can do to protect the water. And they like that we hand out candy too. Doesn't hurt. We also participate in our local parades, just trying to elevate awareness. One of the things that, you know, we still have candy at our parades, but our entry always hands out a publication that we have called We Are All Guardians. It's very attractive. It's got basic best management practices listed in it, things that everyone can do. In northern Michigan, we are on septic systems, and it highlights the need for regular inspection and maintenance and pumping when indicated of our septics, so that they aren't contributing to excess nutrients through the groundwater into our surface water, or even impairing public health. We had a beautiful watershed map that was created by a local artist as well, that we handed out to a number of folks. So education about the watershed can be done in the form of artwork as well. There's a picture of the watershed poster that I was referring to, that 50 lucky parade goers were lucky to receive, along with their Guardian information. We conduct a lot of water quality monitoring on Glen Lake. The association's been around for more than 75 years. I believe that as far as the state of Michigan goes, we're the home of a lot of firsts. We were the first in the state of Michigan, a third in the nation to have a hot water, high pressure hot water staffed boat wash station at our one DNR public access site, where we do a lot of outreach and education to the almost 5,000 boats that go through our public access site every year. We have boats that come from, we've had boats come from as far as Hawaii. Most of our boats are visiting from Michigan or other nearby neighboring states. But I think we had about 26 different states that were represented at our boat wash last season. We were the first in the state of Michigan to have township zoning ordinance to protect, to require boat washing before entering our water bodies, which was the model for the now Michigan state regulations regarding the requirements to clean, drain, and dry. And we have conducted pretty groundbreaking genetic testing of both surface and groundwater, tracing for human and enteric bacteria to determine if there's connectivity between people's septic systems and our surface and drinking water. We recruit a large number of volunteers to help with this. We use state-of-the-art qPCR technology to do that type of analysis. And there's the micro assistant. I told you I had a slide up. And we also partner with our local community college. This is a group of our Introduction to Freshwater Studies students from 2020. These students come as part of their research rotation and work for several weeks in the Glen Lake Watershed, learning all about best management practices, invasive species, algal blooms, water quality monitoring, our Guardian program. And it's just a wonderful way to both utilize volunteers, but also, be a part of developing the future water protectors. Here's some more of the students doing invasive species removal along shorelines. And here's another intern assisting staff in doing the enteric bacteria sampling of water. Here's an example of natural shoreline restoration using some bioengineering. We have not just several inland lakes, but a beautiful stream called the Crystal River that runs through portions of Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore Land. This is a site along the stream bank that ran on the left of the screen. You can see that's M22, a Michigan roadway. And this site along the river is highly visible. It had become an informal swimming spot and place where people launched canoes and kayaks, and a significant amount of damage occurred to the streaming there. We were able to, again, in a highly visible site, we talk in a lot of our education program about bioengineering and coral logs and things of the like, natural native plants, plantings, but often those things take place on someone's, private property on their lakeshore and aren't as highly visible as this site that receives a lot of automobile traffic, pedestrian traffic, and cyclist traffic and water traffic. So we've got wonderful demonstration site that has a sign that talks about the restoration that is visible both from the road and from the stream. And then I always like to slip this slide in here of, what do I tell my neighbors who are on the east side of the lake when the spring ice breakup occurs and there's that long fetch. And on windy days like we're having in northern Michigan today, the ice breaking up can really pile up along that east shore. And these are the types of bioengineering that we would promote to folks in that situation. So it's important to have visible examples to show people. It makes it more easier to envision that something is possible. And this is my final slide that I wanted to leave you with, just a beautiful visual reminder of why we do what we do for water, not just because we depend on it for our life, because it does something for our, I'll call it our soul, to be witness to such beauty, majesty, and it's a part of what makes us human, and we need to protect it. So I have some other resources that I can share online from our website, but I want to give people a chance to ask questions, maybe talk about the idea of having someone that has the position that I have for the Glen Lake Association, for the Glen Lake-Crystal River Watershed, to have a dedicated staff person who is the guardian ambassador is kind of a new thing. And so it's an idea though that is spreading. Lake associations, watersheds in our area have seen the benefit of having a dedicated person for outreach and education. And I just think it can't do anything but improve the situation for water everywhere when we're able to intentionally support that kind of outreach. So Joe, any more questions?
Yes, a lot of questions, a lot of interest. So thank you. And I have to say first, thank you for this presentation and also for the work that you do. I've been watching and thinking, man, it'd be great if there was a Tricia for every lake, So your plug at the end about having, using this model on other lakes, I think is a good one. So we do have some questions from the audience. And I will, we've got a whole bunch of them. So I'll kind of cherry pick them. You just finished up a few minutes ago talking about core logs and installation of core logs. Is this something that you would recommend a homeowner would do themselves, or is it something that requires special training? And is there an information source for learning how to do this or acquiring core logs?
So this is a great question. I love this question. With anything that you do on your shoreline, you've got to have a permit. So make sure that there's various permits that you have to get before you do any alteration in a shoreline. However, with that said, there are these are things that you can do yourself. The installation that we did on the Crystal River was not a site that had high energy. We didn't have to do a lot of calculations, run over rise for our slope of our, installing a gravel bed and then field stone to make the right angles. As in the illustration I showed you, when core logs are not enough, I would definitely work with a professional to do that. One of the double-edged swords that we're running into in Michigan, at least, is that we're doing such a good job on education. We have more and more people that are asking for bioengineering solutions. Our state Department of Energy, Environment, Great Lakes and Energy is coming along as well and requiring bioengineering solutions for before they will grant permits. However, we have a shortage of certified trained people in the state. COVID did not help that situation, but I do know that there's a spring training that is happening very soon, but that's full to get certified as a natural shoreline installer. And there's another opportunity this fall, if I remember correctly. So like I said, there's a continuum of situations. Everybody's property is different. There's a lot of resources online at the Michigan Natural Shoreline Partnership website that was just posted in the chat. You can find listings of folks that at least at one time have gone through that certification process. But it's really important for the homeowner, the property owner, to be educated about what it is that they're looking for as well. Because even though a provider, a contractor is certified, does not mean that they will offer that to you unless you ask for it. It's often much easier for them or and more lucrative for them to do more what I would call traditional methods of installing riprap or maybe quick fixes that don't have that just aren't really what our water needs. There should always be bioengineering in addition to riprap. There should be, all these other things that go into accounting for that. So one of the greatest things we can do as ambassadors or guardians is make sure that people understand what to ask for on their site. And that's another service that I provide, is that I do home visits with folks and give them my suggestions on what might work on their property to fit with their needs for how they want to use their property as well. And then I try to get them in touch with folks that can help them out or direct them to where they can find materials to do stuff themselves.
Thanks. Yeah, that's super helpful. Okay, the next question, I'm going to kind of shift gears here. Okay. There was a lot of interest in the ground watershed for Glen Lake, and so sort of curious, folks are curious, how that's determined, how expensive it is to determine that. If you're able to point to that on a map, I know that was one of your first slides, the maps of the watershed. So these surface watersheds are recognized by the state of Michigan. The Glen Lake-Crystal River Watershed just went through, we just submitted our updated watershed protection plan.
And it's based on that state identified surface watershed, which is basically the line of the highest point where theoretically all the water, that falls on this side of the ridge line goes into your watershed, and everything out goes somewhere else. However, we know that groundwater works very differently, especially in areas, glacial areas. We have lots of gravel, sand, clay lenses, very complex landscape. Our sandy, well-drained soils around the Glen Lake-Crystal River Watershed result in a very different ground watershed than our surface watershed. I do not recall, it was before I came onto the scene here, but it was a fairly extensive process to have that be determined. And I don't know what the cost would be in today's, economics, but it's definitely something worth doing to establish the water budget for your watershed.
Thanks. Sorry, I'll get used to this Zoom thing eventually. So sort of sticking on the idea of where does water come from and go to, there's a pretty steep topography around Glen Lake. What type of building restrictions are in place to prevent erosion and sedimentation impacts from construction?
So this brings up another really good way that we've done outreach and education. Education is an important tool. We believe people, when they know the right thing, the quote, right thing to do, that they will do it. However, we can't catch everybody. So it's my belief that zoning regulation is an important tool in the toolbox of protecting water quality. And we and the Glen Lake-Crystal River Watershed have been working for a number of years to design. We've designed and are now trying to get implementation from our various townships to enact a watershed overlay zoning district that has enhanced zoning, just of the type that the question was asking. It isn't that we don't have protective zoning, but each township has their own regulations. So it's important for regulations to be uniform, to be fair, to be understandable. And there is an important role for regulation. If you are someone who moves to our area from another region, a very different environment, you maybe have always had sewer, right? You don't know that we operate on septic systems. Well, guess what? Septic systems aren't automatically a part of what gets inspected when you buy a home, unless you ask for it in most of the state of Michigan. We're fortunate that the majority of our townships have enacted at least a time of transfer of title of property, well and septic inspection ordinance. That's a really good first start, and at least makes new property owners aware of what they are, this new piece of infrastructure that they are going to have to care for if they want to protect their drinking water and the beautiful lake or river that they've just bought property on. In addition to that, they may not understand why the importance of needing to maintain a percentage of vegetation, of natural vegetation, not lawn, on your property to prevent erosion, sedimentation, and nutrient loading of the surface water. So these watershed overlay districts are, again, a really important tool. We are not there yet. We only have one township that has adopted. That township adopted township-wide. Their thinking was, as I said earlier, what's good for the water anywhere is good for the water everywhere. And there's, lakes in other parts of the township that they wanted to protect as well. So those are just some, I know that there are other lakes, watersheds in Leelanau County that are looking at doing similar things. Crystal Lake, south of the Glen Lake-Crystal River Watershed, has had a very successful overlay, watershed overlay district in place for 20 plus years. So in a lot of ways, Michigan's behind some of our other glacial lake partner states when it comes to being able to have statewide protections in that regard. But if we can't get statewide protection, we can at least get local protection or insist on it as voters and residents of our townships in Michigan's.
You touched on one thing there with new property owners, and I think I was talking to a real estate agent recently, and they said it's something like every 5 to 7 years on average that a property turns over. And obviously there's some places that stay much longer than that, but some places shorter too. And so how do you guys have any particular efforts that focus on new homeowners and try to target that particular group? I believe at one point there was a homeowners guide, and I'm not sure if you guys still do that.
Yep.
Can you talk about those sorts of efforts?
Thank you. Yes, excellent prompt, Joe. I'll grab a couple copies right here. You can find all these resources on the Glen Lake Association website as well. But we do track property sales and actually permits that are pulled as well, and reach out to people when they buy a new home. They get a welcome packet with our landowners handbook and our stewardship checklist, which is just chock full of information. Here's a page on natural shorelines, for example. There's education about septic systems, where it's appropriate to compost, what to do with your hazardous waste, you name it. And the folks also get a free 1-year membership to the Glen Lake Association so that we can get them on our communications mailing list to share ongoing educational information, which, in addition to like a printed annual report that we put out to all of our members each year. So it's, very attractive, something that someone would want to pick up, and they could maybe read an article on septics or invasive species. We also do twice a month e-newsletter, which always features guardian tips, some sort of education related to best management practices. We have an Instagram and Facebook presence. A lot of times they're attractive photos, but we always try to weave some education in there as well.
Thanks. That's really neat. All right, so you have me convinced further that we all need someone like you. How are the Glen Lake Guardians funded? Is it volunteer or donation based? Do you guys have an assessment district? How does the funding come together for your work?
It is entirely funded by the general fund of the Glen Lake Association membership. So memberships, people's dues and contributions to the Glen Lake Association are what funds my position. I know that nearby Lake Leelanau Association, Glen Lake and Lake Leelanau are in the top 20 of the largest lakes in the state of Michigan. We happen to have two of them in our county. Lake Leelanau has recently hired a similar position to mine. The Shoreland Stewardship Program that Michigan has encourages ambassadors for that program, but those are typically volunteers. It really makes a difference. And I don't mean to slight anyone's enthusiasm or, having their heart in it, but when you have a dedicated position, it shows that this is really important. And if and our membership does support it.
Thanks, that's great. Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of questions here, and it's 12:55 or 2:55 here in Michigan. I'll try to finish them up, and we may not get to them all. Let's see. Can folks make core logs at home or use the logs to shore up eroded areas? It's another question about core logs.
Interesting. So that kind of brings two things to mind. It's wonderful if you have a tree or you have to take a tree down on your property, you can actually, and Joe's going to love this because he's a fish guy. Anytime you can install large woody debris in along your shoreline to increase the complexity of the shoreline, it creates wonderful wildlife habitat, fish. That's a great thing to do with naturally occurring logs and branches. However, the idea with a core log is that it's fashioned out of coconut fibers, and you can plant. It will hold a bank in place while native plants get established, and then it kind of biodegrades. So if you were to use a solid log, it's just going to behave differently as it breaks down. And so there's reason why I recommend core logs versus, the place for the really intact, hardwood species. Those I think belong as increasing the complexity of the nearshore habitat, but not somewhere where you're going to want to access the shore.
100% on that.
Okay.
Yeah. And they require permits.
Yeah, they all do. Yes.
I'm contractually obligated to say that. Okay. You mentioned at one point that clean, drain, dry is kind of the spoken standard for boat washing. But Michigan doesn't require the drying component, moving from one location to another. Does your township or any other local units of government require the drying phase or period of drying, or is it really just the draining and the cleaning?
I don't know technically for sure. However, if you get your boat high pressure, high water temperature washed before you go into a lake, and again when you come out, it has the same effect. Or if your boat has been out, or your equipment, your waders, your blinds, your all that stuff, anything that's been in the water needs to be out of the water and dried for a period of time before it's safe to bring it into the water without washing it again. So the best place to find that kind of information is at Clean, Drain, Dry or Clean Boats, Clean Waters. That's all the more I know to share about. Like I said, there's so many great resources on that. I'm not even going to begin to go there.
Yeah. Well, certainly Clean, Drain, Dry is an important strategy, and would encourage folks to use those resources. And I see Joe Lattimore put a link for the Michigan program here in the chat. Do you guys have a lake board?
We do not.
Okay. And the last question that we have on our list is there's one point where you're talking about the difference between ground watersheds and surface watersheds and the varying geography and geology in glacial states. And there was a question of whether there's any karst landforms in this part of Michigan where you guys are.
No, not that I'm aware of. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's right.
yeah. Where you really tested my geology of Michigan, bringing me way back. I do want to mention a couple other resources on our website that it didn't go into. We also have a guide for landscapers. We have a Guardian pledge that is specific for landscapers or people that do on-property maintenance. That's available under our Guardian tab on our website. We also have resources for folks who are renting their places so that our visitors, short-term visitors, at least have some educational information available that talks about, don't use shampoos or soaps in the water, clean, drain, and dry. Nothing goes down the drain that you wouldn't drink or that didn't come out of your body. Those types of helpful tips are included in printed material that can go into rentals, but also we have a series of magnets that go on the refrigerator with like the top 10 or so BMPs for short-term users of our nearshore areas and water. So check them out.
Yeah,
And
that's great. And there are a ton of links in the chat. They're piling up, and they're all really interesting stuff. So I think that's a good time for me to mention that after this webinar, we will be following up with the folks that registered for the webinar, and we'll have all of the links provided in that email as well. We'll include Tricia. So if you have additional questions, you can reach out to her and follow up with her directly. And we will have a link to the recording of this webinar. So if you found it useful, like to share it or watch it again, we'd encourage that as well. And so, yeah, those will be the next steps. Certainly encourage folks to check out the MGLP's webinars website for our next webinars in our series. I think we have 3 or 4 more left this spring. So we encourage you to check those out. At this point, we have no other questions. So Tricia, I'll just say again, thank you so much for presenting. It's wonderful to see all of the work that you guys have done. And I think there's a ton of examples here that we can draw upon for use on other lakes around, the Midwest and elsewhere. So thank you. It was a wonderful presentation. Normally we would be clapping for you if this was an in-person presentation. You'll have to just put up with my thanks here in representation of the 50 or 60 folks that were on the webinar. So thank you.
Thank you.